Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler. Today, we're talking about
handling the holidays during COVID-19. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We've got Thanksgiving and all the other December holidays coming up, and then of course there'll be New Year's right around the bend. And it sounds like a lot of people want to get together for the holidays, and that is both the source of perhaps a bit of comfort for some people, but a lot of grief and anxiety for other people. And so I guess there's a lot of different issues here that we wanted to put on the table, but we also think that philosophy, particularly practical philosophy, can be quite helpful in this time. So we're going to, lay out what the situation is, and then we'll talk about some tips, some ideas, some suggestions that you could use, exactly as Dan has said, not just your everyday life, but your holiday day life, right?
And, what little day we have. It is, the doldrums of winter, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons why we have a lot of these celebrations at this point in time is it kind of coincides with winter solstice, Yule, which has kind of taken over for Christmas, and the Yuletide still is what we call this period, at least for portions of like Europe and whatnot, is all about like the getting through these dark, cold, dreary months, and what better way to do that but with people and the community that we as a social species really crave for. But unfortunately, we have to kind of short circuit these really basic wants of being together in the large groups that we usually associate with this season, specifically because we love these people. It's kind of counterintuitive, at least in one sense.
Yeah, you can say that it's challenging enough living in COVID-19 times with all the economic dislocations, and here in the United States, quite a few political conflicts about whether people should wear masks or socially distance, or whether COVID is even real or not in some places, which, is quite a striking thing to be happening in this 21st century of ours. But then you add to it everything that you're talking about with the, the shortening of the days. I remember here in Wisconsin when I was going to college, and there were quite a few people who would work in the factories that they wouldn't sometimes see the sun for days and days on end. It was quite hard on them. SADS is a serious issue here. So we've got all of those challenges, and then we've got something that seems kind of a cause for optimism, getting to see our beloved friends and family again, and now we take that away. So, but we're not really taking it away, right? It's about prudence.
Right. There's definitely a portion of the population that sees more blame in things that have more agency, and because there is like no agency within COVID itself, it is just it's a piece of RNA that just does a thing which happens to also kill us, but it doesn't have like an agency behind it intending to kill us.
Yeah.
And so there's then those people that are saying you can't do things, and because they have more agency and more intentionality, I guess it seems to be those people who have a more fundamentally conservative outlook find more blame to give to those things that actually have agency. And so will tend to be more angry at those people that are imposing lockdowns or saying like this is what we need to do in order to fight this thing. So
Yeah, and that can lead to rifts within families and friend groups. I've seen it quite a bit where, somebody's saying, "So you're saying that we have to do X, Y, Z," and you might respond, "Well, no, the CDC is telling us this is what we ought to do." And then they're saying, "See, so you're one of them. You're imposing this," as you're saying, upon the rest of people. And I think when it comes to family matters, especially with Thanksgiving, it's interesting talking with my European and South African and Australian colleagues. All of them are like, well, we've got the Christmas season coming up and we're getting ready for that, how we're going to get through that. But you Americans, you have Thanksgiving. So you've got an extra blip on the timeline that you have to be concerned about. And they all say it in sort of a tone of voice that conveys something like, "Oh, you poor SOBs." I mean, in normal times, it's really nice to have. I mean, so here's like a little bit of off-topic stuff from a instructor's perspective, as somebody who teaches college. Having Thanksgiving in a normal year means that we don't get any real work done from students except for final exams from Thanksgiving onward, because they go off on Thanksgiving break and they have a good time, and then they come back and they're not really ready to do a lot of work in those final week or two of December before they take their final exam. So you almost can write off accomplishing anything. Yeah, I suppose you could say similar things about a lot of workplaces too, right?
Right. I guess it kind of depends on if your work is more atomic, that you can just go and, like, if you work 3 hours and you got 3 units of work done, hooray, like at a factory. That's still fine. But yeah, if you got to like do any like projects or whatnot, the amount of work goes whoop.
Yeah, and then, I mean, there's all the holiday parties and stuff like that, sucking up time. So, but now we're in a very different circumstance. So this is a serious challenge, and we've been dealing with COVID now. How long? I mean, March was the beginning of the lockdowns.
So 7 months here.
Yeah. And so, it's not something that we're totally unused to, but I think a lot of people want the holidays to be different. They want there to be almost like a release or get out of jail free card, or, an exception to be made.
I don't know. I don't know if I want this exception.
Yeah, well, that's the issue, right? Where it's a struggle between rationality and prudence and what our desires are. And though, it's not as if these are illegitimate desires. Wanting to get together with friends and family, it makes sense.
So, going back to a point I was making just a moment ago about, the agency of things and who to blame for it. Going to the dark arts of, advertising and social psychology, there's actually a technique of, instead of removing the agency from it, or like not imbue COVID with an agency. And so think of COVID, or try to frame it in the way of, it's a murderous little bug that wants to specifically kill your parents and grandparents, and it's going to use you and your children to get to them.
So do you, when you see stuff, as I'm seeing in social media, where people are saying, the generation that went through World War II, they didn't get time off for Christmas or Thanksgiving or get to go back home. All you have to do, there's actually a great German ad, all you have to do is to like lie on the couch and not go anywhere. Can't you at least do that? Or, all you have to do is put on a mask. Is that an appeal to something kind of similar, this metaphor of we're in a war with this virus?
I don't think they're quite making that direct, it is a war. I think it might actually be useful to define it as a war. Like, for the longest time, I thought the idea of, the war against poverty was just stupid marketing. But it's not for me. It's not for me that they're putting it at. It's more to, I guess, to someone that has a little bit more of a conservative mindset.
More of a martial frame of mind, or
just the idea of the loyalty and to the group, which is if you're familiar with what is that? Jonathan Haidt wrote a book about it, but he's not the only one that's written about it. Called the Righteous Mind, and it's
I remember that. Go ahead.
Moral foundations theory is the basis of it, and so I think they're if you look at generally they've got like a group of people that are considered more conservative, and you've got a number of what he calls like taste buds or faculties within the mind that can be either turned up or down how much you react to them, and they are your disgust versus cleanliness, your loyalty, your fairness, unfairness, and your I'm just like trying to pull these out of air here.
That's
it's enough of them.
Idea. Yeah.
And if you're either libertarian, you have like a couple that are really high and others are low. If you're conservative, you have some that are higher and others low. And if you're liberal, you have some of these are and others low. Everyone has all of them, and just of one of them that for those people that tend to be more conservative, one of them that is cranked up higher than most of the others is this loyalty one. And that loyalty, if you can appeal to loyalty, you can bring people on that might not agree with you on everything. And it seems to be there is a connection between loyalty as well as
that's interesting, because I mean, to begin with, I've read Haidt, and I don't buy a lot of what they're saying, because I think a lot of it needs to be highly qualified. But let's say we go with the assumption that conservatives, the way to appeal to them is through loyalty. We've got a problem now in our highly polarized environment, because so many of them feel like people who are further left of them aren't worth loyalty.
Right.
And so, I'm not sure that gives us the hook that we need at this point in time. I think it would have been a really effective thing like 10 years ago. And maybe the Tea Party has ruined that for us, A lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
But it's going back to this idea of like using advertising insights. Are there any other things that we could do to get people to take COVID and not gathering together in huge groups, and to see that sacrifice as being worthwhile, to take that as a live possibility for themselves?
Right. None that I can think of offhand. I think the one of giving it agency, so it's not just this unagencied thing versus people that are making you do these things that you don't like to do, is a very useful way to actually give it some agency, draw it with little face and fangs and whatnot, and say, this thing wants to hurt your parents and your grandparents.
Yeah. I remember when I was little, they did that with tornadoes.
Oh, yeah.
And they had these comic books where there was like, and I don't remember how this worked out, but there was like a good tornado, and then there were all these bad tornadoes. And the comic books were basically to teach you what to do in case of a tornado. We get quite a few of them here in Wisconsin. And tornado drills were very common. So like, how to get under your bed, and, go to find the basement, and, don't look out the window at the tornado that's coming, things like that. And I think that by depicting it with, like you're saying, with agency and intentionality, it might have got it home to us dumb kids a lot better. So maybe that's quite helpful. I do want to mention some of the interesting surveys that have been done that give us a bit of cause for concern. So interestingly, the big survey, of course, was that 40% of U.S. residents say that they plan to gather in groups of 10 or more during this holiday season, that was a survey from Ohio State University, and nearly 33% of them said that they wouldn't require friends or family to wear masks, and 25% said they wouldn't practice social distancing. So that's a significant number. I mean, let's say the numbers are off by 10%. That's still enough to do a lot of spreading over Thanksgiving, and it's quite worrisome. And what do you do? This is part of what we're going to talk about. What do you do if your family is mostly of that mindset? Do you participate to keep the peace? Do you say, I think this is a bad idea? But the other thing that I think was kind of interesting survey-wise was this one that was done by Supermarket News, of all places. And they said that nearly 3/4 of U.S. consumers aim to spend the same or more as last year for Thanksgiving items, with more than 80% saying it's important to celebrate the holiday in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, so far so good, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to spend money. That's great. It keeps the economy going. And then they said 80% of those surveyed said they plan to shop in stores. Now, the numbers don't completely add up. 19% said they would buy online for delivery. 15% aimed to use curbside pickup. They were allowed to use more than one purchasing method. But if, even if like 60% are crowding into stores, that's not good,
Right.
So I don't, what do you make of these polls?
Tradition is very pulling and telling.
Yeah.
And it is disheartening, but they do say that, like, if the vast majority of us actually wore masks and kind of did proper social distancing, like, there was a study I was just reading yesterday said that if 95% wore masks and did proper social distancing, we wouldn't have any more lockdowns. But guess we just can't have nice things. And so, like, in one universe, it's like, okay, this isn't actually a problem because people can actually follow the rules well and do these things. But I also know people, and
now what does that mean? Explain.
Well, I think everyone's know people. What is it? There's a great quote, and I might have quoted it here before, from Men in Black. And Jay and Kay are talking, and Kay tells Jay, who's the new rookie, is like, okay, a human is smart, intelligent, clever, and calm. People are panicky, scared.
I see where you're going.
And prone to violence. And it's like, in the aggregate, like, especially as a group, we can kind of go into a little bit of mob mentality, and also as a group, it's really hard to get everyone on the same page doing everything that is right, especially when there are a lot of competing factors that are sending bad information about that this is even a hoax, that it's not even real.
Yeah. And it's hard to get people to comply with rules even in non-pandemic times when they don't have a ton of stuff on their mind, but maybe it's even harder sometimes to get people, ironically, to take real dangers as seriously,
And if you go historically to the 1918 Spanish flu, there was even anti-mask sentiment then. That was like the first time that we had masks in the United States, I believe, as a widespread thing. And there were like, I don't know what they called them exactly, anti-masks, but they made leagues of like the unmasked in order to fight the oppression, or I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the propaganda stuff that was used, and propaganda not in a pejorative sense, but that's just what they called it back then, to try to get people to wear masks. It was fairly primitive advertising. Some of it had good little rhymes, or cartoons or things like that. So people are going to be faced with all sorts of scenarios. You might have a family group, as we mentioned, who want to do a traditional get-together, or you might even do Friendsgiving, and maybe the Friendsgiving group says, hey, we're going to do it this year regardless of the COVID issue. So what do you do then? You're kind of posed with a dilemma. You can say, you can make up a lie and say, oh, I'm sick. I can't go. Right. I suppose so. You almost have a trilemma, but you could just say, listen, I don't think this is safe. And then, you're going to get all these responses from people that are pushback, or you can go and just kind of sweat the whole time that you're there and hope for the best. Right. So that's not a great position to be placed in.
Yeah, you're either doing something that you think is bad for yourself, or you're juggling different loyalties. You have this group loyalty that you have to your family and or your friends to go and do this thing with them, versus this want to stay healthy and also not potentially pass things. And you have to, I guess, make that decision for yourself, which ones are more important. And if you feel like your health is more important, then you better, I guess you've got two options. You can lie, or you can actually be truthful and honest with these people and say exactly how you're feeling.
And risk conflict and hurt feelings and isolation and being told that you're overreacting, all those sorts of things. So that leads to the second thing. Maybe your group actually says, well, we're going to be prudent about this. Your family, you said, is a prime example. My family is as well, in a different way. We're not getting together with our relatives. I don't know that any of my relatives are actually getting together except in the households that they live in. But then there's this, you're alone on the holidays, and that kind of sucks too, right?
Right.
There's that song, "I'll Be Home for Christmas," right? And it's such a sad song, although we play it as if it's a happy song, but it's a sad song because the person doesn't make it home for Christmas. They're only going to be home in their dreams. And we don't have Thanksgiving songs as far as I know, but we could have similar things for Thanksgiving too, couldn't we?
Yeah. And that longing is there. And it's also, there's a longing for me to sing that song right now because it's in my head. And
it's a catchy tune. Yeah.
It is. I love it.
Yeah. And then there's other people that we could think about too, like what's going to happen at retirement homes, or what's going to happen at homeless shelters. I remember when I was in the Army that Thanksgiving, for those of us who were on post overseas, was kind of a big deal. They'd bring out a decent meal for us as opposed to the normal stuff that we'd eat in the chow hall, which wasn't terrible, but wasn't great. But they'd, give us a real Thanksgiving meal. What are they going to do? Are people just going to have to be isolated and on their own in these sort of circumstances? It's kind of tough to think about.
Yeah, like I've in the past gone and helped prep dinners for Thanksgiving there's a big homeless thing with the Salvation Army that I've helped out in the past. And yeah, like those are great. And I was actually thinking about this a couple days ago. I was like, are they going to like box them up and like send them off and so you can like eat, not with everyone else? But like, that's kind of like half the point of Thanksgiving is that sharing.
that is the prudent thing to do, right? That would be the safe thing to do. But you're right. There's something lost. That sense of connection to other people.
But once again, it's your trade-offs. It's like, is it health or this feeling a connection that we have, and hopefully we can get through this. And the vaccines are looking on the up, at least at the moment, and next year may be a different story.
Yeah, I think next year about this time it'll certainly be a different story. I'm hearing people saying things like, well, maybe we'll get to have Easter this year. And that brings up another good sort of side question, right? So there's all these other people who have already made sacrifices about particular religious holidays. Diwali was just, going on recently, and we can talk about Ramadan, the breaking of the fast, and we can talk about various high holy days for Jewish denominations. And, we can also talk about what happened at Easter. And Easter was kind of a mixed bag, unfortunately, because a lot of churches didn't do what they were supposed to do. And so we can say, well, why is it that people are supposed to stay, in these very small groups and not get together in big family groups for these other religious holidays, but Christmas is supposed to be an exception, or Thanksgiving is supposed to be an exception. It seems like if we want to honor the sacrifices that other people have made, that adds weight to the side of not getting together in anything other than very small groups for Christmas or for Thanksgiving, which is right around the corner.
Yeah, just kind of like think about it. If you have a big gathering and that potentially ends the life of one of your loved ones, they get no more Christmases.
True.
And we all sacrifice
perspective,
a Christmas now in order for many more in the future. It's kind of like that. I don't know, the marshmallow test. Although I know that the marshmallow test is fraught with repeatability.
Replication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the idea of delayed gratification. Can you delay 1 year of Christmas in order to have potentially many more?
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, now this is a bit off topic, but I'll bring it back in a second. When I was, I don't know, maybe 9 years old or so, our dog Lady got hit by a car and hit pretty badly. She was a black dog. She was running at night. She got hit by a car that was probably going 25 to 30 miles an hour. Totally destroyed her hip. And she ran for about 100 yards before she dropped. And then I was there with her for about an hour before they were able to get her to the emergency vet. And then once she was at the emergency vet, we're all there with the family, and my dad came out with the vet, and he said, well, we got a choice we got to make. We can either put Lady down and we'll have Christmas this year, or we can replace her hip and there isn't going to be any Christmas this year. And we didn't even think about it because my son, I don't know what my mom did. I actually don't quite remember. She might have been, well, I don't know about Lady, but me and my sister, we both responded immediately. We're fine with no Christmas. Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to do that for a dog, why not so much more for an actual human person? Mm-hmm. Now it's not quite so cut and dried as that, right? Because there's only it's a probability that somebody will get sick. But if you have a big enough family, you're almost guaranteeing somebody's going to get sick. Right.
I believe they had they made a map recently with data about infection rates. And if you go to a gathering of X amount of people, I think it was 5, 10, 15, 20, 5-person increments, they tell you what the probability that someone there was going to have it.
Yeah, and it was done by county, right? Which is very interesting because the results could be very different from one county to the neighboring county.
Yeah, and so basically, at least in Wisconsin here where we're at, if you had a group of 30 people, there was a 95% chance that someone had COVID in it everywhere in the state.
Wow. That is sobering to find that out.
And I think if it was 10, there was a 30% chance that, at least in Milwaukee.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of like the thing with in a class of any given size, how many people are going to have the same birthday, and you say, well, how that's so unlikely. But actually, as the class gets bigger, the odds go up quite quickly. So
right.
Well, we should, before we jump into what philosophy can provide, we've already talked about some of the challenges that are in front of people. And I think there's some that we should talk about that, whether we have COVID or not on the scene, they're problematic for people who are away from their family, or sometimes problematic for people who are there with their family. We make movies about this, after all. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges of the holidays?
Challenges?
Or issues people are facing.
In respect to COVID?
No, taking COVID out of the picture. Oh, I mean, COVID kind of adds a new wrinkle to it, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about social dynamics here between, it's your family, but you don't really get to choose your family. And so a lot of times you have people with very different, I guess, potentially religious or political views that can cause wrinkles within the conversations. And some families are better at dealing with these things than others. Sometimes these things can turn into all-out brawls versus a quiet like, I don't know, non-verbal slight resentment. Like, let's just not talk about that.
You can also have just old beefs that have nothing to do with social issues politics or stuff like that people just don't, either they don't bring up or they bring up in ways that are antagonistic and kind of poking at each other. We often don't see these people for most of the year, and then we get together with them, and that's probably the worst time to try to fix family dynamics. Right? That's something for the therapist's office, not for the dinner table, maybe.
That's like it reminds me of Festivus, airing of grievances.
Oh yeah. Actually, that's one of the good things about Festivus, right? The holiday for the rest of us.
Yes, the Festivus for the rest of us. Good old not
Feats
George,
of Strength?
but Frank Costanza.
Right.
Yeah. Feats of Strength. Yes. But yeah, I definitely say like there's a catharsis of like getting things out there, but is it really the best to do it right in front of everyone else and have all your dirty laundry? Is that better to actually, sit in a more calm environment, maybe the two of you, in order that you can deal with your stuff without having to worry about if your reputation is on the line with everyone else in the family?
That's true. And also, I guess you can say this, not of all families here in Wisconsin, but quite a few that, at these occasions, people do get liquored up, and that probably doesn't conduce to working old beefs through all that well. Doesn't lend a sense of proportion or perspective to people.
No.
Although it may make them more willing to talk about things. Yeah.
Does it actually result in breakthroughs or benefits?
Yeah. And and then we've got the other side. People, COVID isn't the only way that people can be isolated from their family. People might be unable to travel. Other illnesses could stand in the way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or. There's also sadness and loss of grief of those the people that aren't there anymore, and so that's always maybe your grandma died and you hadn't like thought about it, but now you're back together, and all of a sudden all those memories come back of oh God, like the last time I saw all of you guys was at Nana's funeral.
Yeah, and a common complaint for teenagers is that they feel kind of isolated even in their family. It might just be a phase thing, but they don't believe that. But that can be the case for so many of us as adults as well. Feeling like, well, I know these people, but I don't really fit into this group. So that can be troubling. COVID-19 adds another particular wrinkle, even for those who want to downplay it, which is greater awareness of our mortality. And I don't know that that's the best thing to mix into holidays. So, it's maybe Halloween, but not Thanksgiving. So should we talk about what philosophy could do to help?
I do believe that would be a great thing to talk about.
So, there's a number of different things. Before we jump into this, I want to say that we don't have to have like everything figured out in order to make some sort of progress or make a good right move or something like that. And a lot of the issues that we're being faced with are issues, you could say, of personal development or of ethics, really, when it comes down to it. And ethical issues are always going to involve some controversy. You can't expect people to agree with you across the board because that just doesn't happen. That's part of why people have to sort of stake out stands on them and think through them with principles or other useful tests or things like that. And it's also, you might say that there's an ethical imperative to be well informed about the matters that we're going to make decisions about. So COVID would be one of those matters, right? So go ahead.
Like one of the things that we were talking about earlier was that dilemma that one has when they have to weigh health versus those social expectations.
Yeah.
And how do we do this? It is, ethics is to a certain extent the study of what is the right thing to do in the situation. And, depending on your ethical framework, you're going to maybe come to different conclusions about this. But it is good to have an ethical framework that you are happy applying, and it might not be perfect, but at
Yeah.
least you have thought through that process.
Rather than just like trying to make it up as you go along or go with your gut, or because that's usually how you get in trouble. It's interesting. There was a Venn diagram I saw floating around a while back when the COVID pandemic first started, and it had 3 circles. And one was for utilitarianism, one was for virtue ethics, one was for deontology, 3 main approaches in normative ethics. And then somebody actually put together a 4th one that had ethics of care as well, which is another ethics theory out there that we typically teach when we're teaching like business ethics or biomedical ethics or any of those sort of things. And they all coincided in one thing: wear a mask. It's, so there are different theories out there. Most of them are going to converge on some basic things. Don't be a jerk to people, be fair. If you make a commitment, stick with the commitment. And they'll have different reasonings. Like the utilitarian will say, well, this leads to the greatest, benefits overall. We want to maximize positives, minimize negatives. The deontologist will say, listen, buddy, rules are rules are rules. You got to follow them. And the virtue ethics person will say, well, what kind of person do you want to be? You want to be a schmuck who doesn't follow through on stuff? Or you want to be a decent, stand-up guy? I mean, they don't usually use that in the academic setting, but, people recognize these basic traits, but they're all going to converge on the same basic thing. And I think with this, we can remind ourselves that what is the key priority here? We can say, well, I want to be with my family and have a good time and, feel like things are normal again. But that's actually not the priority. The priority is keeping people safe during a deadly pandemic. And, we can have all sorts of other motives, but those other motives might have to be, placed in the proverbial back seat, right?
Right. Yeah, and, these Venn diagrams in other situations may come to divergent positions, but
Right.
in this one, it basically all the major ethical frameworks come down to the same conclusion here.
Yeah, the one exception would be like egoism, which would say, well, do whatever is to your benefit. And you could still say, well, from a rational egoist perspective, try not to get yourself sick.
Right.
But it could be, well, I like, being with these people and I value that more highly, so screw everybody else. That's a possibility. But that's kind of an outlier. There's a really great story. Go ahead.
Isn't there also from the rational egoist, like, I care about my health in order to maximize my health. I should do the thing that makes sure that other people don't get sick, because then they are potential vectors to me.
Yeah,
and
that's
to altruism through pure selfishness.
That is where the breakdown in the information stuff is so damaging, right? Because you're right, from a rational egoist perspective, once you accept that wearing masks and socially distancing and, not going to huge, concerts or stuff like that, or family gatherings of 100 people, like a wedding, for example, once you accept that as basic reality, if you are a rational egoist, you're going to do that. But we have a lot of people who don't accept that as basic reality. And they're almost, I think in part because of this desire to like everything should go back to normal, whatever normal used to look like. They're almost at the other end, like somebody with a chip on their shoulder, saying, you're not going to control me. I mean, when we have a Supreme Court justice here in Wisconsin calling wearing masks tyranny, that really shows that kind of mindset. But there was a story I wanted to bring up, one that you're familiar with. And it has to do with this guy, Epictetus, who was a great Stoic philosopher and teacher. And he had a dad come to him. I think you know where this story is going,
absolutely.
right? So the dad, Epictetus says to him, how's fatherhood treating you? And he says, oh, it's awful. My kid got sick the other day, and I found it to be such a unpleasant experience. And Epictetus, oh, tell me about that. And the dad says, yeah, I love my kid so much. I feel what the Greeks called familial affection towards her, philostorge in Greek. And I felt it so much that I had to leave. And Epictetus, wait, you left your sick kid? And the dad said, yeah, that's how much I love her. And Epictetus, we got to think about this for a second. Now, first of all, did the nurse leave? Did your wife leave? Are you going to say that they didn't actually love her? And then he says, let's think about whether this is the loving thing to do, to abandon your sick child who might die, to go away because you feel this, whatever it is. Whatever it is that you're feeling, it's not familial affection. It might be anxiety. It might be, depression, something like that. The loving thing to do would have been to stay by her side. This is the opposite of that. The loving thing to do, the affectionate thing to do, is to stay the hell away from these people who we love. Mm-hmm. And however difficult that may be, we really have to do it, especially for the ones who are, immune compromised, the older ones, the ones who maybe don't take precautions as often as they should. It's tough to do, but that is I think the affectionate thing to do, which shows us that these philosophical stories, sometimes we have to think of what's the principle involved, right?
Mm-hmm. And in this case, I guess Epictetus is arguing to this father, what is an excellent father? Is an excellent father someone who runs away from his child in their time of need because they felt bad seeing their child in a time of need? It's no, you got to go and do what a great father does. And in this case, your family is what does a good family member do? What are the main things it is to be the family member to support, at least very much don't hurt your family member. And if you are doing things that are, okay, think of it in a different context. You've got your sister sitting in your front seat with you, and you're driving drunk. You are doing something rather dangerous, and not only are you putting your life in danger, but you're also putting your sister's life in danger.
Yeah.
And everyone reacts very negatively like that. You reacted very negative to that situation as I presented it, and I think it really that is a very analogous situation here. That
interesting. Yeah, I see that. Keep going. That's
we are bringing potential harm. You could drive home drunk and you could potentially get home safe and sound and nothing happens. Did you do the right action there, even though that there's no actual bad that came out of this? What would an actual excellent brother do? Call a cab, call an Uber, sleep in your truck or something, or whatever. Don't drive your one of your loved ones home in a way that could potentially kill you and them.
Yeah, and so you bring up something there that comes out of Stoic ethics, which is role ethics. And it's not only found in Stoic ethics, but it's particularly pronounced there. This idea, as Epictetus says, you can identify what your responsibilities are by looking at the names of the relationships that you have. So like you said, what does it mean to be a good father? Or what does it mean to be a good friend or a good sibling? Good family member. I guess we could say this too about what is it for me living in an apartment building? What does it mean to be a good neighbor? In terms of whether we wear masks in the common areas and socially distance. They just actually put down a bunch of footprints in our elevators and halls and stuff like that. In part because people weren't taking it seriously like they're supposed to, and so this is what 6 feet looks like. So following through on that, yeah. And so that would stand in the way of participating in these big family celebrations. I guess we should move on to talking about, so let's say you're going to do the right thing. You're not going to go to the things. It does suck. You don't get to see people who you love and want to see. How do you handle that time on your own? What are ways that you can still be connected with other people or make good use of that time? Or
And there's a number of ways to keep connected with your family. We don't need to physically be with each other all the time. Especially now, we live in a world in which technology is abundant with new ways to keep ourselves closer than ever. Like,
yeah,
there's still a level of granularity that is not there. Like when you and I speak, we haven't seen each other for months.
that's true. Yeah, we haven't been in the same place since February.
Right.
Yeah.
Did one last show at the radio station and then we're gone. And so, but I see you every 2 weeks or so, and there's definitely a feeling of camaraderie with you, and we can do this with our families. I've done lots of Zooms and other video conferencing with lots of people that I'm close to, and I do them regularly, and it really does scratch that itch. Not all the way, but good enough.
Yeah, and so I think that's a key element to it, that good enough, that being willing to accept not having everything be perfect or everything be ideal. And there's ways, like you said, around this that we can use digital media to do it. Some families have talked about like trying to have a Thanksgiving meal together. And then somebody else came along and said, watching everybody stuffing their face and trying to have a conversation while you're chomping down on stuff, maybe that's not the best thing. Maybe you should have a digital dessert, or a toast or something like that, but let the eating happen off camera, right? Nobody needs to be looking at each person chomping away on things. And people might also get jealous about not having, the great, in my family's case, the great Tootsiai, the meat pie that some people make. I can't make it here, so I would, feel a twinge of envy. But dessert, anybody can supply dessert, and you could have drinks or whatever it is that you're going to do. And then you can chat, then you can catch up, then you could have that conversation. If it was going to be watching the game, I suppose you could watch the game together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are very, very technologically inclined, virtual reality and some of the things like VR chat and there's a number of others that allow you to have physical presence within a space and see people is another level up of granularity. Still not all the way there. Cool. But it's very interesting, and you can be whoever you want.
Yeah. When the VR gets to the point where we can taste things, that'll be amazing, won't it?
I don't ever think that you're going to get a really good, something to stick on your tongue, but
so I think the snozberries are never going to taste like snozberries, is what you're saying.
No, they're not. Except for things like maybe Neuralink. I think that's the only time that you're going to get to where you're, instead of actually, changing the receptors on your tongue, right, you're changing the neurons in your brain, saying this should taste like blueberry or snozberry or.
Yeah. This is totally off topic, but it would be with the tongue thing. We know that the taste map was actually nonsense,
right?
And it's way more complicated than that. And we do have these receptors for things, but we also have to worry about mouth feel. And I don't know how you capture the fattiness of a steak or something like that. But again, we don't have to have it perfect. It can be good enough. So how do you handle, the family thing is over. How do you handle being on your own and being sad and lonely, missing the people that you want to be with? What does philosophy have to help us with it? You can read philosophy to take your mind off of it. I don't know that that's a great solution.
But there's only so many things to read in the world. And I guess we have an incredible amount of stuff to read at our disposal. But it is very useful to be able to deal with yourself, to actually be happy with yourself and your mind. And instead of just constantly filling our ears and our eyes with movies and podcasts and music, to sit and actually be with ourselves. And that is a cultivated skill that can actually bring incredible benefit.
So are you talking about being with ourselves by reading philosophy books, or are you talking about being with ourselves without like bringing some other object into it?
I say both here. This is, I guess, a big tent, but you can be with yourself and read and think about things. But if you're just reading, then you're never sitting with the thoughts. And so you to write down your thoughts, or to take in some of the meditation practices in mindfulness meditation and meta meditation that are out there, to actually start to investigate your own mind's eye, your own consciousness, how it works, and sometimes deal with those things that would bother you, that you are drowning out.
Yeah, so taking some time, some unstructured time to think about things, or to figure out what's going on in your life. That's Rainer Maria Rilke calls that solitude, Einsamkeit, being literally on your own. A word that we can also translate as loneliness. But it's possible to do that without being lonely. And with him, it's not, there's a sense in which we can do this out in nature. He says, get to know the things of nature. He's actually writing to a guy who's stuck in too much nature in his letters to a young poet. He's writing to this young would-be poet who's actually I think Austrian army officer stuck way out in the sticks, and in what we would probably consider beautiful mountain area. But he's like, I can't stand this place. And Rilke says, no, look at it, check out the nature that's there, but also go within, think about your childhood. Your childhood and the memories that you have are an incredible resource. And, the solitude can be painful and the solitude can be difficult, but that's because you're letting it grow, opening up a space inside of you. And it can be done in the heart of a vast city, because Rilke did it in Paris of his time. He was actually a secretary to Rodin, and Rodin was in Paris, so that's where he had to go for that. And I think there's a lot of different converging spiritual traditions that give us ideas about how to handle being on our own.
And it's interesting that we use solitary confinement as a punishment within our prison system here in the United States, which is considered a torture in many other countries and is outlawed. But and it's only a torture if you don't know how to cultivate that self and that solitude within yourself. And it's interesting from my own practice of meditation to sit and when you brought up Paris, and made me think of all the noises of a city. And when I sit here and regularly I'll hear cars drive by in front, or I'll hear an ambulance drive down the street, the busy street that's not too far from me, and you get to understand that these are just sensations of the mind, that they exist only within your mind, that they are outside, they're just pressure waves of air against your eardrums, and only once they actually hit your eardrums do they become a sound in which we can understand. And so that is just a signal that is hitting our brain, and so it is not the thing in and of itself. It is not the siren, it is our perception of that siren. And so all these things that we think that's the cat yowling, or that's the car driving too loud with the music going on, and it's all these things are just they're things, they're signals that have happened to come upon my consciousness, and they are only annoying or bothersome if I define them to be annoying or bothersome.
I was just laughing because I was thinking about another sound a cat could make, which so many cat owners know, which is, throwing up in the middle of the night, right? But even that, you could be like, oh, this cat's doing it again. Or you could be like, that's the nature of cats. And, now I have the opportunity to do something, go over and clean it up. It's not that big of a deal. And I think we could we could extend that as kind of a jumping off of a silly point, but we could extend that to, being faced with this situation opens up opportunities to us to do things in different ways. Our families have traditions usually, and even friend groups have traditions, and those traditions seem like they're being broken by our non-physical involvement, right? But maybe it's time that we make new traditions. I really like, there was this great set of suggestions in a Reddit about COVID-19 support, about how you can still be with your family. And, they talked about do things by Zoom or Skype, but I like some of these other things, like make holiday cards. How often do we actually do that? I mean, maybe this is the year to do that and mail them off. Or, sponsoring a local child or getting a friend a gift that that they'd love. Probably have to ship it, rather than go to the store to get it. But, those are things that we can do. I think that we have a lot of opportunities here for doing something that could be productive, that could represent progress on our part.
Right. Maybe we should go to the practice here.
Yeah, so this is something, again, we've been talking a lot about things where there's a convergence between different ethical theories or spiritual traditions or philosophical approaches, right? So this is one where there's a lot of different philosophers and wisdom traditions that have said that you ought to do this. When you're thinking about what you're going to do, consider what you're actually setting your hand to. Get yourself clear about what you're getting yourself into. If you're going to go to a family gathering, prepare ahead of time so you're not taken aback when people come up and start hugging you. You don't freak out. If you're going to do that, that's probably something that you should be prepared for. If you're not cool with that, then maybe don't go to the family gathering, or get a sign that says no hugs, please, or something along those lines. And same thing if you're going to be on your own. Maybe it's a good time, to start thinking before the actual holidays happen. How am I going to get through the holidays? Start looking around for resources. Start accumulating ideas about what you're going to do. Start making some good plans for yourself. Start finding out what technology your family is familiar with, so that you can corral them into a Skype call or a Zoom call or a Google Meet call or whatever it's going to be, whatever form of video conferencing. There's also freeconferencecall.com, which we used years back, which is kind of nice. You probably know a whole bunch of them, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah. They're plentiful on the net nowadays.
Yeah. What else would you say people need to think ahead about to plan out ahead of time?
If you're physically going, I'd say, maybe a bubble suit. Heck, you could, they've got those blow up T-Rex costumes, and they've got a number of blow up costumes nowadays.
True, yeah.
You could potentially, have a family gathering, but everyone has to wear a blow up costume.
Be pretty hot, though. Maybe.
It would be. Well, you could have it outside.
those things are kind of clumsy, too. People would be knocking things off the table. Yeah. Well, that's actually a good idea. Yeah, that could work.
All right. Well, it seems like we're at the end. So we've got one quote to leave you with from, good old Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah, he knows something about solitude, too.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Him and his horse, right?
Much later on.
Yeah. He who has a why to live can bear any how.